Tuesday, December 24th. I'm Tonya J. Powers. As many of us are gathering with family to celebrate, the families of those still being held hostage since the October 7th Hamas attack in Israel are spending another holiday separated from their loved ones. One woman who was directly affected by that violence is working tirelessly to get those hostages home.
The truth is that we need people to elevate the stories. So many Americans don't realize that 7 of our fellow Americans are hostages, or there's 100 people that are hostages. And I think that we all have social media. We all have this ability to elevate it.
This is the Fox News Rundown, Evening Edition.
From the Fox News Podcasts Network. Stay on top of the latest news and information from Fox News. Listen and download the Fox News Hourly Update on your time. The trending stories you need anytime you want it. Listen and download now by going to foxnewspodcasts.com.
The holiday season, for many, brings an additional focus on family and getting together with friends. After all, today marks the eve of not only Christmas, but Hanukkah as well. And amid the celebrations, one woman is keeping her message front and center, a plea to not only remember those still being held hostage by Hamas after last year's horrific attacks of October 7th, but to, with one voice, demand their release.
On October 7th, 2023, I was in Tel Aviv. Like the entire country, at 6:30 in the morning, sirens were blaring, and whether we were in bed still or just getting up, we were all running to safe rooms and shelters and stairwells.
Liz Hirsh Naftali is the author of Saving Abigail, the true story of the abduction and rescue of a 3-year-old hostage.
And that's where I was that morning. And, you know, we kept going back to the safe room. We'd be released and then we'd go back because the sirens kept coming. And it was that morning, about an hour later, that I learned something was happening along the border with Gaza. And I have family that has lived in a community there for many, many years called Kfar Aza. And I called them to see that they were okay because there was something happening, but no one answered. And then I called a relative in Tel Aviv area and I asked her what was going on. And it was that moment she had said that Hamas terrorists had invaded their community and murdered my niece Madar, her husband Roe, and we believe their baby 3-year-old Abigail that morning.
When you were given this news, how did you even process that?
It was so shocking and so unbelievable. And we got this news from my niece and her husband's 6 and 9-year-old, a little girl and a little boy, that were locked in a closet in their home. After they saw the murder of their mother and their father, and they believed their sister, they ran and locked themselves in their closet in their house with a cell phone. So, it was just, and my other niece who lived in the kibbutz was across the community with her husband and 3 kids locked in a safe room. So it was just a morning personally. I mean, there was so much devastation across the south of Israel, but for my family personally, it was just one of those jaw-dropping, I can't believe this, and shocking. And we just didn't know what was really happening other than what we were hearing, and unbelievable. And I know that during that day, I basically just cried and just kept waiting to see if something good was going to happen. And the news just kept getting worse.
I want to go back for a second about one of the things that you were talking about when you're in Tel Aviv. It seems like you mentioned, you go to the shelter, you come back, you go to the shelter. I think most people in America who've never been to Israel and have not experienced this find it's extremely hard to understand that is a way of life there. That is something that, as you mentioned in the book, it's kind of, okay. I think one of the things that really jumped out at me is at the point where you're talking about how you were supposed to have brunch with your daughter at 11 and you thought, well, maybe we'll be done in time. I think if we here in America had to have that experience of, I'm going to run to a shelter, and then I'm back and forth, I don't know how I would be able to just go, yeah, maybe I might make brunch. How do you square that? How do you explain to people that this is the way things are there?
You explain it by saying the truth, and that's how it is. And it's a horrible reality. Nobody should be running to a bomb shelter safe room throughout their day, but that's become part of life in Israel. And, there's an app that people have on their phones that rings, and you can actually put what districts you're in, and the siren will actually go off in the neighborhood, but then your phone will ring with a horrible blast. And then you go to a safe room. And just to give you reference, like yesterday in the evening, I got one of those alarm notifications because I have the app because my kids are living in Israel. And I knew that my daughter was in a safe room. I hope she was. And I texted her, "Are you okay?" And she texted me, "I'm in a safe room." That was because in the middle of the night in Israel, missiles were coming in. So it just gives you this idea of this is the reality of having had hateful neighbors that were sending missiles in. And people don't understand this, but these came from Yemen. But before the peace agreement, they were coming from Hezbollah in Lebanon. They come from Gaza. And I don't know how to explain this, but people are used to it. They go into their shelter, then they go back to sleep, or they go out and they continue their day, whether it's in school or work, or they go out to lunch. This has become a reality, and it's a cruel reality, and it should be unacceptable.
I want to ask about Abigail. She was 3 when she was taken hostage after the attack on October 7th. How is she now?
She just turned 5. Her 4th birthday was as a hostage in Gaza over a year ago. But she's a very resilient, and you see the picture of this beautiful child, and she's very resilient, and she is joyful. And if you saw her tomorrow and with a group of kids, you'd think she was completely just one of the kids. She likes to dance. She likes to play. I like to say she likes to eat French fries and strawberry ice cream. She's a regular child. But we also know that when she is running to a safe room, to a bomb shelter, she's asking if Hamas terrorists are going to find her there. She knows she was in Gaza. She knows what she experienced, and she knows that her parents are no longer alive. So at the same time, while she does live a beautiful daily life, and she lives with my other niece and her husband, and they have a beautiful life under the circumstances. So she is given what a child should have. And I just, hope and pray that that's what she continues to be able to live with. And while she has those memories, she'll still have a beautiful life.
How long was she held hostage?
She was actually held hostage in Gaza for 51 days. And keep in mind, when you say held hostage, I need people to understand she was in a dark little room with no air, no food, a piece of pita bread a day, no water unless they asked for it. Basic hygiene was not afforded to them. They had no medical visits. Nobody checked on them. And they were left alone. This woman who she had sought refuge with and her 3 kids, and Abigail, literally had nothing for 51 days other than each other. And, so when you ask, that's what those 51 days were like for a child who is used to laughing and singing and being active, and they were silenced. They could live in a whisper. And that's how they lived for 51 days.
How did you receive word that she had been freed?
So each evening, there's a list that would be put out. And for the first few days, Abigail wasn't on the list. On the 3rd day, we learned that she was going to be part of a group of women and children from their community who were being released. And, to be honest, and this is what they've said, is until you actually see your person who's being released, in our case, a child who just turned 4, in the arms of the family, you actually don't believe it's going to happen. And in our case, we had 2 things. One, we knew 3 things. We knew she was on the list. I got a call, as did my family in Israel, from President Biden, just saying, "I just want you to know that Abigail, your loved one, is back in Israel." And that was what we, both in America and Israel, received from President Biden. And then we saw this picture of Abigail in my niece Laron and her grandmother Shlomit's arms. And those were how we knew Abigail was released.
Wow. That is just every part of this story is stunning. And the way that you've written your book is jarringly honest, and it's the thing that people need to read and need to understand about what's going on over there. it goes so much deeper than what I think most Americans have seen or gathered from the surface of these stories. As horrific as they are, you really get down to what it's like to be a family member who is affected by this directly. You said that that Abigail was freed after 51 days. You have continued your mission as an advocate for the ones who are still being held hostage. Tell me what that's been like.
Well, first, think about this. Like, you wake up on October 7th and you're part of this new family. And it's not a family you chose, but it's a family that you were given. And these are people, at that time, there were 246 people who were kidnapped. And you start to become knowing their stories and who they are because you're actually advocating with them in Washington, D.C., and you are in Israel meeting them. And there were 12 American families, and you become close to these people. And the reason I say that is because while Abigail and another American and 105 people were released at the end of November of last year, you still are in it because you're still close to these people and you still care about them. And this is like a humanitarian crisis. So you're just out there saying, I'm going to still be in this fight. And I will say this, which is like, I know what it means to be a hostage family for 51 days. And I've learned what it meant to be a hostage by Abigail and by Hagar, the woman who took care of her, and others that have come out. But I have to tell you, I have no idea what it means to be a mother or a father of a young woman or a young man or the children of somebody that is waiting today as we speak 440 days for their loved ones to come out. And what I just can't even imagine and what it is to be a victim, to be somebody kidnapped and being held in a tunnel for 440 days, being abused, starved. And I just don't know what it means. But all I know as an individual, as an American, as a woman, and as somebody that cares, I'm going to be in this fight until they're all home because they need to come home. That's the only way people can start to heal and move forward. And until then, we're in this crisis.
I know you've been in contact with the Biden administration. I know that, we have an incoming president next month. What has your communication been like with the incoming Trump administration in dealing with this and in the hopes of getting the hostages freed?
Incoming President-elect Trump has made it very clear he is demanding that the hostages be released and that the fighting is ceased before he enters. And he's declared they'll be held to pay and such. And so what that has done is made it very clear to the Americans, but most important to Hamas and to Israel and to the region, in the Gulf region, that while President Biden is the president for the next 31 days, and is continuing, he's got his people, CIA Director Bill Burns and Special Envoy to the Middle East, Brett McGurk, they're all there in Cairo and in Doha doing this work. But you also have in collaboration the incoming president, who has made it very clear that there needs to be the hostages released and a ceasefire so that people can continue, we can move forward. So when you ask that question, it's really unique. And we have kept the issue of hostages both with Democrats and Republicans, bipartisan. And here we have the President of the United States, Joe Biden, President-elect Trump, and there is a collaboration to do this same work. And it is a unique opportunity. And everyone is pushing and everyone is working very hard because what they understand is that these people must be released. What
do the other the parents of other hostages that You've got lots of pictures on social media, interviews that you've done. You have been tireless in getting the word out about this, talking about Abigail as well as the hostages that are still there. What do you hear from the other parents who are still waiting for their loved ones to come home?
They are doing everything they can. They are desperate. For many of these families, there's no sign of life. Or for some of these families, they've seen a propaganda video by Hamas after 430 days, as was seen by an American family with a young boy who grew up in Tenafly, New Jersey, Edon Alexander. This family had no sign of life from him until this propaganda video came out. But what I can say is these people wake up every day and they think, what more can I do? They're traveling the world, they're traveling the country. And you asked in the prior question, They are meeting with people in Congress. They're meeting in Washington, D.C. They're meeting with people that are part of the Biden administration, but they're also meeting with people that are part of the incoming Trump administration and having conversations and telling their stories. And I go back to, like, they are doing everything they can. And look, it's really hard to get people. And I thank you for having me, because it's very hard for us to get the truth out to the American public, which is influential in pushing the American government and making it clear to both Hamas, which is a terrorist organization, but also to Prime Minister Netanyahu in Israel, that this is a priority of America to resolve this, to bring home our 7 Americans, but to release and free all of the hostages.
That brings me to my next question. What can our listeners do, people who are hearing this, who may not really have understood what's going on over there? And I urge people who are listening to this to read Saving Abigail. It will give you a much better idea of what it's been like. But what can people who are listening to this do?
Well, we're at a really interesting time. And I say this because, like, we have this, as we've talked about, an incoming Republican president, a current Democratic president. They're doing what they can and they're pushing. And, if somebody knows either one of those teams or those leaders, then I suggest they reach out to them and they encourage and they say, we are supporting you to release these hostages. If they have a relationship with anybody in the Middle East or in Israel or in Arab nations in the Gulf, and they have pressure, I don't know who's listening. They need to reach out to them and say, make a deal, help us get this deal done. But I also can say that the truth is that we need people to elevate the stories. So many Americans don't realize that 7 of our fellow Americans are hostages, or there's 100 people that are hostages. And I think that we all have social media. We all have this ability to elevate it. And we all have this ability to bring the humanity of it. And that's what I tried to do in writing Saving Abigail, was make Abigail really a child that people could relate to.
Liz, I've got to ask, it got to take an emotional toll. This work, it is not ceasing. As you said, this is something that you're going to continue until all the hostages have been released. How are you holding up? How are you doing with all of this? It's I can only imagine what it's like to walk around and be on this mission and doing this work, and everybody else is just kind of like doing their thing, going about their lives, buying holiday presents and planning events, and you're like, this is what's going on. How do you deal with that?
When you asked that question, I started to cry a little bit, because what I do is, you just keep going. One of the things that people have advised me is you just keep going. Even when you get beat up or even when you hit a roadblock, just keep going. And I keep going. But I write about it in the book. Like, there were nights when Abigail was a hostage and I was doing this work, and there's still those nights, or those times when the camera's off and there's no one there, or when you talk to your dearest friend and you just cry. You just cry. Because this is so painful. And, like, it's painful to know what these hostages are going through. It is painful to know what the families are going through. And it is painful also that there's been denials and people that, could look at a child like Abigail and say she's an oppressor. And you keep pushing to tell the truth. But, I will say this, which goes back to, like, this idea of, there's so much more love in this world, and so many more people than the hateful voices that seem to get press and seem to be elevated. There's so many more people that throughout this process have shown myself and the other families, and shown for the hostages, so much love, so much support. And so while it's devastating, I look around and I see how much love I've received and support and hope. And I look at Abigail, and I spend a lot of time in Israel visiting and spending time with her and her siblings and my family there. And when I look at this child and the other kids and I see the future they can have now, that does give me hope. And that gives me this nourishment to keep going. But thank you for asking, because I think that what people don't realize is, yes, myself, but all these other families, and ones that have received horrible news, like our family, about death, and 2 people that will not be there to raise their children, is just devastating. And when you sometimes keep going, but then when you take a break, it's just heartbreaking. And so, I thank you for the question, because I think people do need to understand that this is like, people look like they just keep going and they're so strong, but all of us are very fragile, and we just keep doing the work because there is no other choice.
One of the lines in your book stood out to me. It's about 30 pages in, and you said, once we found out that Abigail could be alive, I became a new person. Now there was something to do. Now there was someone to save. And that's exactly what you have continued to do as you do this work and move through the world in these parallel universes almost. Liz Hirsh Naftali, your story is amazing. I urge everyone to take a look at it. You are the author of Saving Abigail, the true story of the abduction and rescue of a 3-year-old hostage. Thank you for joining the Fox News Rundown Evening Edition.
I appreciate your time and thank you for this thoughtful interview. And please, let's all pray for their return and have happy holidays.